What is up, everyone? Welcome to the second episode of No One's a Critic, a new podcast between myself, Kino, and Macabre Storytelling. How you doing, Mac?
Not too bad, man. How about yourself?
Good. It's been a tough week. A lot of work going on, a lot of video editing. I'm going through my Breaking Bad videos I've been doing lately, and then I'm also prepping for my Wire videos, which I'm going to do probably next year here. But it's a very, very dense show. So I'm doing a lot of research and stuff like ahead of time in preparation for when those videos start to come out.
Are you doing it like episode per episode like you did for Breaking Bad and Sopranos?
So I'm gonna do something a little different for The Wire. I think it's a show that I don't think would work on like an episode by episode basis. It's like one episode doesn't it's not the whole story. It's just part of the story. You have to, it's like that quote from Freeman. All the pieces matter,
Mhm.
and so you have to kind of look at it as a whole. So I think I'm gonna do more like video essay style, looking at just different aspects of the show as a whole. Because there's so many different angles you can look at the show. It's so dense. It's so complicated. I think it's going to be a whole series in and of itself, but just a little bit different than the Soprano log series.
Gotcha, definitely. Yeah, but it's one of those shows where like I think part of the reason I had discussed this before, or like one of the main reasons, the show didn't do very well when it was on cable or when it was
No.
airing on HBO, and I think part of the reason was because week to week, so much happens in an episode, and it's
Yeah.
so dense and it's so important to follow every single step
Yeah.
that even if you forget like one or two scenes from the previous week,
Yeah.
you're almost lost.
Yeah.
That's why the show really found success when they got into streaming,
Hmm.
because you could binge like 4 or 5 episodes in a sitting and kind of absorb everything happening all
Yeah.
at once.
And it's also a show that I don't think you're meant to really understand everything the first time through. It's like a book. You need to read it multiple times, or you're not going to get all the layers to it.
Exactly.
It's a
Doesn't
lot of
hold your hand.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's so rewarding.
Hmm.
What about you? How's your week been so far?
Good. We saw the Batman last week.
Yeah.
That's obviously our first podcast episode on.
Yeah.
I'm doing a video on it now, or scripting it. I think I might be able to record later today if I'm
Yeah.
able to get the script ready. Um, yeah. I got a couple other projects in the works. Finally gonna finish the Crafto series, which
Mhm.
some people will be excited about. It's taken me like a year to finish
Yeah.
it. And then a couple other things just in the works, but we're getting there slowly but surely.
Yeah. And I saw you're continuing on interacting with fans, talking to them about different issues, which is always a very, like I said, a very brave thing to do to interact live with some people who disagree with you at times.
Yeah, it's good. I think it's good. Not even just like I enjoy just talking with people and stuff like that, but also just to sort of have, if someone does have a different view, to bring them on, and like maybe even like I'll question some of my own, like, oh, actually, I didn't see it from that perspective before.
Yeah.
Um, some of the people on there are a little bit unsavory, but hopefully we'll find some more
Yeah.
high quality people in the future.
That's how it goes with any kind of online community. And I definitely think this episode of the podcast is going to be along those type of veins. So why don't you go ahead and introduce us to the topic we're going to be covering today?
Yeah, sure. So, I think I brought it up to you just because I had done my James Bond breakdown of the Craig saga, and obviously because Craig is done playing the role,
Hmm.
there's a lot of question as to who is going to take up the mantle. Um, Now, there's been a couple names been floating around, Henry Cavill, Tom Hardy, I think, stuff like that. But right now, it's really up in the air.
Yeah.
And the big question is, and this has sort of been a part of the discourse for a while, for a
Yeah.
couple of years now, is whether or not Bond could be played by either someone who like was not white,
Yeah.
or a woman.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, this has kind of been put through the prism of the quote unquote culture war,
Yeah.
and it's kind of gone a bit messy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of discuss with you about it, to sort of see if we can find give a reasonable take, one that
Yeah.
isn't like, if you don't like this, you're racist,
Yeah.
or no, you're destroying our culture, yada yada yada.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's an interesting topic to talk about, and like we've covered before, you and me generally have a very nuanced, balanced take. I'm interested to hear your side of it first, since it's something you're kind of more familiar with. I'm not. So I mean, you obviously you watched all the Craig James Bond. Did you watch the previous ones before that, like the old Sean Connery ones, or any of the other? I mean, there's been a dozen different James Bond eras. So are you a big fan of the series?
Well, I wasn't really a big fan of the series at all up until the Craig films.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned in the video, my parents rented one of the Pierce Brosnan ones. I think The World Is Not Enough, like
Okay.
years, like when I was a kid. I
Yeah.
kind of like walked in on them watching it. Um, but yeah, I wasn't really a big fan. After the Craig saga, in preparation of my video, I kind of went back and watched more of the classic ones.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's strange because my perception of Bond, it really is interesting to see how different iterations of, depending on the actor,
Yeah.
it really does change the character. They're not all
Hmm.
playing the character the same way.
Exactly.
Roger Moore is a lot more of a kind of a lighthearted adventure romp.
Yeah.
Then you have Timothy Dalton, who's a lot more like brooding and serious.
Yeah.
Um, and then Sean Connery and Pierce Brosnan are kind of in the middle.
So it's interesting. I watched the first James Bond in preparation. I was gonna do a series, kind of just watching like a whole like for these series that have a lot of movies. I was like gonna watch the whole thing and just kind of talk about the evolution of it. And so I started with the first James Bond, and it was interesting. I can't say I was a huge fan. Um, it's Now I'm someone who it doesn't like bother me like quote unquote like problematic things. Like I give it the benefit of the doubt, of like this is a different era. They're not abiding by the same things. He is really really sexually aggressive. In that first one, is it Doctor No?
Hmm.
The first one, yeah. It's been a little while since I've seen it, so I apologize if I get it wrong. Especially for people watching this who might be like diehard James Bond fans. But there's a scene where he there's like a Japanese woman or an Asian woman who's like she's a spy for the bad guys. And he like I don't want to say rapes her, but she's like not wanting, like trying to like push him off of her, and he's like grabbing her and kissing her and stuff. And then eventually she's like, okay, give in and have sex. And then, but she's the bad guy, and so they come and like arrest her later. That's what I remember from the movie. I saw it like it's been a while since I've seen it. Um, but I was a little bit like, oh, okay, yeah, I could see why some people would have a problem with this in the modern day. I was like, I'm all right with a lot of this shit. I mean, he bangs a lot of women very consensually. But this one, I was like, oh, okay, you're living up to the stereotype here a little bit of James Bond.
Yeah. Well, it's there's two factors to it. One is, of course, we know that it's like there's a time in it's a product of its time in the
Yeah,
'60s. However, I think the other thing to think about it is that you know I think there are people who would like get like super offended by it. However, on the other end, we have to kind of consider, like for example, in a lot of romance novel, like something is like something like Twilight, the relationship between Edward Cullen and Bella, the main characters, it's very creepy. It's very like I watch you sleep and shit like
yeah,
that. And there's all this like sort of like this tension, this push and pull, and and not even like in Twilight, but like in a lot of like romance films, you could describe the relationships as very toxic.
yeah,
Like the characters usually do things that, like, if your significant other did in real life, you would be like, "I'm out of here," complete like immediately. However, there's a sort of suspension of disbelief. We
yeah,
understand that it's a a fictional piece of work. Um, we understand that there is a sort of fantasy about sort of the forbidden love and
yeah,
like the sex, like growing essential sexual tension. Um, So in that case, it is kind of it does bug me when people are kind of like, "Oh, this is totally super bad." It's like it's not. I don't really think the film is like endorsing this. Like this is how you should treat people. It's more of a it. It's just kind of going along with the fiction in a sense, I guess.
Yeah, no, James Bond is 100% like a power fantasy for you know, traveling to exotic lands, banging exotic women, you know, getting into fights, killing people, having adventure. Um which I don't think is a bad thing at all. And I think things that we think are critically acclaimed, like The Sopranos, are on some level a power fantasy as well. You know, we want to be Tony because he's, you know, strong and he can have any woman he wants. He has all this stuff. I think one of the things that we've evolved in terms of storytelling is not just being like gratifying in the sense of like, yeah, you should be James Bond, you should be doing all this stuff and having fun and doing whatever, but also showing the negative side of it, just like The Sopranos does of like, yeah, Tony has all this power and sex and all this stuff, but he's still miserable, and that's what makes
Hmm.
him interesting as a person. And I think the modern incarnations of Bond have explored that side more, where it's like, yeah, he's gonna go to, you know, this foreign country. He's gonna bang this hot chick, but he's also, you know, suffering because of the loss of the people he's loved. You know what this job has cost him, and he's more of a real person than just a caricature of a highly masculine action hero. You know?
Well, that's sort of the irony is that in the books, the Ian Fleming novels, the character of Bond is a lot more. He's not. I wouldn't say chauvinistic. I mean, a little bit. He's more. It's very similar to sort of like how Craig portrays him in the sense that like he kind of views women as sort of like objects. He kind
Yeah,
of views them as just sources of pleasure. Um, and in the books, him betting women and sleeping with women, it doesn't actually have that sort of like badass. It's very similar to kind of like Tony Soprano, where like it like if a younger and more impressionable guy might watch it and like, oh yeah, the money, oh yeah, he's banging all these chicks, and but then when you're like Don Draper is also another perfect
yeah,
example of a character who like he sort of puts on this facade of traditional masculinity, and yet if you're a a grown man yourself, you kind of watch it with this. It's almost sad in a way. You kind of almost see the he's using this to sort of cope. He's sort of putting on a role.
yeah,
That's how James Bond is in the novels. Don Draper, Tony Soprano. Um, I think the issue with and I don't want to say the issue, but the difference in the James Bond films is that Sean Connery, when he first debuted in Doctor No, it kind of fell into that sort of what's sort of like sort of like middle ground where it kind of deviated away from the more like brooding, depressing aspect of the character and kind of tried to play it off as more sort of like a power fantasy.
yeah,
And then as time went on, once it got into the Moore era, especially, it became it that sort of the whole like sort of like womanizing thing kind of got it reeled off a bit because it Roger Moore plays the characters a lot more sort of like kind of kind of kooky, kind of goofy, a lot more lighthearted. But then, of course, as time went on, Timothy Dalton had a much darker portrayal of the character, and then after Brosnan, Craig was the most like, I guess you could say like postmodern,
yeah,
like the sort of like a deconstruction of the character.
yeah,
Um, yeah. So, and because of that, because we're in this period where we've seen characters like Walter White, Tony Soprano,
yeah,
Don Draper. I think going back to that old school Bond isn't really going to fly. Not necessarily because like it's not politically correct,
yeah.
but just because I think we expect more out of the character nowadays.
Yeah, and I mean, he's always gonna have the James Bond shtick, right? He's gonna go to exotic locations. He's gonna bang hot women, but rather than just grabbing them and being like, "You will have sex with me no matter what," it's gonna be like a more. They're gonna flesh out the female character more. They're gonna make it so she wants to bang James Bond because they have a relationship. They've interacted in some way. You know, she's a person rather than just again a caricature that we're just trying to play into the fantasy with.
Yeah. And I think it also, going back to what you were saying about, in Doctor No. I think a really insidious view that a lot of guys have about that is that I've seen this a lot with like sort of like younger dudes. They kind of feel they almost kind of don't think that women enjoy sex. They kind of almost think they almost see sex as something that they have to like get from women, not something that two people engage in
Yeah.
consensually together.
Yeah.
And I think that's also part of it, where it's like, you know, there were some parts where some like, moments in the old James Bond films where it would kind of feel like I don't want to, but I can't resist,
Yeah.
the woman that fantasy, which was kind of, and again, I get the sort of like the fantasy of it, but it's sort of, especially nowadays, it's kind of like an old school
Yeah.
thought. It kind of is very, again, it's something that like James Bond gets from them as opposed
Yeah.
to them consenting to together.
Well, I mean, another interesting thing about James Bond is it spanned, not only different like cultural, styles of like, the different types of stories we tell of James Bond. It's also spanned a lot of different aesthetics, right? So it's like early on, he's just a normal 1960s spy going to locations, shooting up places, whatever. Then it gets into the like more sci-fi area where the bad guys are gonna blow up the moon. The classic parody of like Doctor Evil, right? We
Hmm.
put a laser on the moon, and a very very sci-fi 70s 80s kind of aesthetic there. And then the Craig movies brought it more again towards like the modern like terrorist states and like financial stuff, like all sorts of, like the modern stuff that we deal with today. It'd be interesting to see where the franchise takes itself after Craig. Is it going to go back to the more original style of like simple kind of spy stories? Is it going to go more sci-fi? Going to stick to more modern aesthetic? That would also inform, you know, the types of stories they're going to tell there.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny because that actually for me is what I'm more interested in about. Like, I don't really care who plays Bond.
Yeah.
It's more for me. What's interesting is how are they going to handle it? Are they going to go sort of like with more of a, you know, are they gonna keep it with the well, personally, like with the video I did, I'm curious as to whether or not they're gonna go back to like the old episodic structure
Mhm.
where it's just like one-off films each time,
Yeah.
or that's gonna be like more of a serialized thing as they tried to do with Craig, but kind of failed. Is it gonna be more, the original Doctor No,
Mhm.
Sean Connery, where it's like very grounded and gritty, or the more fun-loving Roger Moore films? And depending on what direction they go with, you're right. That sort of dictates who will be the right James Bond for the role. Like for example, Henry Cavill has been thrown out a lot. I don't think he would make a good Craig or Brosnan or Connery Bond, but I think if they're going with like a Roger Moore style Bond, I think
Mhm.
Henry Cavill would be perfect.
Yeah.
So, but of course, they probably
Mhm.
kind of like you said, I think it's going to be the other way around, where they're going to choose Bond and then build off the films based on the actor's strengths.
Probably. And of course, the premise of this video, what we wanted to open it with is, can Bond be played by someone who's not um I hate saying the word white male because that conjures up like that phrase is so politically charged. But can he be played by someone who is, not traditional in the role, which, Bond has throughout his history has been, a certain type, a certain, not even just a white male, but a certain type of white male, a strong, tall, masculine guy. Can he be portrayed by, again, a minority? Can be portrayed by could they make a female Bond? And I think it's fair to say that you and I again are um, much more open than probably some people are in both directions. Some people who want James Bond to be a certain race, one way or the other. Where I think it's fairly safe to say that you and I are more concerned about like who is the best actor for the role and what are they going to bring to it and what are the stories they're going to tell with this character.
Hmm. Yeah. So, like, just to start off, personally, it's hard too because there's two. You can agree with someone about a view, but it can be for totally different reasons. So, for example, personally, I do not think a woman should or could play Bond.
No.
However, not because there are a lot of people out there who are saying it's like, well, it's feminism and all that, or it's like, they're trying to take down men. It's none of that. The issue I have with it is on one hand, I really don't like this habit of, everyone complains about like the lack of female roles in movies, but then when it comes time to like actually put effort into, putting the effort in into making them, they just kind of half-ass it.
Yeah.
Like, like the Ghostbusters reboot was a perfect example. A lot of people were pissed about that. Like they were like, "Oh, they're destroying my childhood," yada yada yada. I didn't really agree with that. I never really liked that argument. My contention was that, hey, you have like four of the funniest actresses working today. You have Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, um, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones. Like all these women have proven themselves as very funny and very talented, and you wasted them.
Yeah.
Like you didn't utilize their strengths. You just put them in a movie, put Ghostbusters on it, and then sent them out, which
Yeah.
is a shame. That's bullshit.
Hmm.
Um, for me, the reason I don't think it should be a woman playing James Bond is one, of course, like I would rather them actually think up an original role. Like I
Yeah.
would like to see more of that. But two, I think that, and this is the main thing, I think you would have to change so many fundamentals of the character
Yeah.
in order to make James Bond a woman
Yeah.
that it kind of defeats the purpose.
No, it would be almost like a parody of James Bond rather than like, a continuation of the character. Because as we've established, his whole shtick, right, is these certain kind of masculine tropes, which some aspects obviously are going to be changed and toned down or whatever, but that core, like we said, you know of who he is, it's a masculine fantasy, and changing it too much would be, it wouldn't even be recognizable. It just wouldn't be the character. And I agree with you completely. I think if you wanted to do a female spy story, make it an original character and make it its own thing. And then you can actually be true to what this character is and what this series is, rather than trying to change an already established thing into something else.
Exactly. A good comparison is, are you familiar with the Ocean's 11, 12, 13 movies?
I mean, I know what they are. I haven't seen them, but
Yeah, so it's basically like the first one. It's like, George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon. You have this group of men coming together to rob a casino. Um, so after the original trilogy, Ocean's 11, 12, 13 ended, they made Ocean's 8, which was like a sequel with Sandra Bullock, and it was
mhm,
all women.
yeah,
So, and a lot of people, got up in arms about it, like, oh, they're trying to like, women just take over men and whatever.
yeah,
My what I was excited about was like, hey, I think this is actually interesting because I'm curious to see how would a group of women tackle a heist differently? Like
yeah,
what, because so for example with James Bond, there are many methods that James Bond uses to tackle his mission.
yeah,
Like he uses his charm and his wit, of course, but then when it comes down to it, he also has to use his brawn
yeah,
and his muscles. Um, so what I would be interested in seeing is if there was a female version of the character, how differently would she move through the world? How
yeah,
differently would she go about her mission?
mhm,
Sort of another little segue. A lot of people were getting on the case of Robert Pattinson when he got cast as the Batman
yeah,
because, oh, he's not big enough to be Batman. He's too
mm,
scrawny.
yeah,
And what bugged me about that was that while, Ben Affleck's Batman was like this big brawly bruiser, I was more interested in seeing, oh, wouldn't it be kind of cool if we saw a Batman who wasn't as physically formidable,
yeah,
but actually had to use his wits
yeah.
and maybe his speed and agility to take out his foes. Um,
Well, he
but the,
was physically capable in that movie too, but it
mhm,
was like a different kind of physicality. He was tall and lanky, and he like towered over people in that film. Like, and it was creepy almost, like
mhm,
how tall he was. It made him look strange and off-putting, which again fit with that whole aesthetic of what the movie was going for. So I think you can, as we've established, you can do different things depending on what the actor brings to the role. They can play it differently, and James Bond has had a variety of different guys playing him. They've all been strong guys, but Sean Connery has a more like dad body in the movies. It was an era before like guys had to be like fucking cut, six pack, everything like that. He's just a normal big strong brawly dude. Versus kind of more modern actors would obviously have hella tone, hella definition, which I don't think like a 60s era spy would necessarily do that. They would be focused more on like, you know, their combat ability and strength rather than like dietary needs in order to get that cut.
Yeah. But again, it's to kind of bring it back for the Ocean's 8, what was disappointing about that film was that instead of putting it through a new lens, it's like, hey, how would women
Yeah.
move through the space and like, take care of the heist? It was just like a rehash of Ocean's 11, which I
Of
thought was
course.
kind of stupid. Um so yeah, on one hand, I'm like, hey, a female version of James Bond, I think would be interesting. That sort of spy template. However, you would have to change so many fundamentals of the character that I think you might as well just make an original character.
Yeah.
And that's not to say it's like, oh, because she's a woman. It would like I wouldn't be okay with Michael Cera playing James Bond
Yeah.
because the fundamentals of the character, he's
Yeah.
suave, debonair, muscular,
Yeah.
traditionally masculine. It just doesn't fit.
If Michael
Um,
Cera played James Bond again, it would be like a parody of James Bond. It would be
yeah,
like a
exactly.
we're taking it, we're intentionally turning it on its back, but we're not meant to. You're not meant to believe this is James Bond. This is like Will Ferrell playing James Bond. It's like a comedy almost.
I
Yeah,
actually, well, they kind of did it with Austin Powers, but I could kind of
yeah.
see like
Well,
Michael
exactly.
Cera.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
That
could
I
kind
mean,
of see that with.
he's not like sexy. That dude. He's like it's funny how not James Bond he is while being a James Bond character.
Exactly. So yeah, I think so. I think we're both on the same page. We don't a woman playing James Bond to us doesn't make sense. Not because like
Yeah.
feminism, but just because we don't think you would have to change so many fundamentals of the character to
Yeah.
it just wouldn't. You might as well just make an original character. However, now we come to the bigger, the more I think prominent discourse, which is can James Bond be played by a non-white
Yeah.
male actor? Idris Elba is the main one I think who
Yeah.
has been sort of floated around. And personally, I think just going off of again, not putting skin color aside,
Yeah.
just going off of who I think has the right vibe of the character,
Hmm.
he is compared to other like people have thrown out, Tom Hardy, Henry Cavill,
Yeah.
a couple other guys, but I think Idris Elba is from just going off of a vibe standpoint. I think he would nail it the best because you and I were fans of The Wire,
Yeah.
so we've seen he has that cold, calculating,
Yeah.
that vibe to him, but also in the Wire, and also have you seen Luther with
No,
him?
I've not seen that.
He plays a detective in that, and he's a lot more unhinged.
Yeah.
He's a lot more like physically aggressive,
Yeah.
and I think taking into account those two sides of him,
Hmm.
he would make a great James Bond. This guy who can put on this like facade of having it together, while inside he's got this rage and
Yeah.
this sort of what's sort of looking for this dangerous unpredictability,
Yeah.
I guess.
No, I'm a huge fan of his from The Wire. He's a fantastic actor, and I think both like you and me both fundamentally like we don't care who plays Bond as long as they do it well. They bring something great to the role, and it's a great performance. I want to take a stance against this just for the sake of discussion. I want to explore this idea more. So the question is like, is James Bond iconic as a white actor? Is this a character who represents a certain identity group and is therefore an idol to some people, and would it be then disrespectful to have them played by someone else? Because we can of course agree that the opposite way applies too. Like there's certain characters who if they were played by a white actor, right, it would not be okay. because this is a person like Black Panther or whatever. This is a person who is iconic to this group, who this group, looks up to and views as a very great representation of themselves. So to have them played by someone else would just not work. It would be against that culture. I don't know if James Bond falls into that, but where does that leave? Where does that leave the people who identify with Bond and who want him to be a representation for them?
Well, it's sort of strange because I've heard that is one of like the main things I've heard is that one of the main arguments I've heard is like, well, what are we gonna have a white guy play Black Panther, or like Martin or like Ryan Gosling play like Martin Luther King or something.
Yeah,
Um, However, the big difference there is, of course, not just like obviously like Martin Luther King, he's a real person, so
yeah,
putting that aside, but like let's take Black Panther.
hmm
The difference there obviously is the fact that if a white actor was in the role of Black Panther, the story wouldn't make any sense.
yeah,
Like it's crucial that the character is black in the context of the
hmm
story. Um, However, if we go to say another situation, like I'm trying to think of, I don't know, Will Smith in Independence Day.
yeah,
Um, is there any reason that character has to be black? No. There's no. I mean, there might be references throughout the movie,
yeah,
but there's no real reason it has to be. Another good example is The Matrix.
yeah,
Neo.
yeah,
He was originally,
yeah,
or they originally tried to get Will Smith for the role.
yeah.
So the character is not defined by his race. It
No,
doesn't. It could be black, white, Asian, whatever. It
yeah,
wouldn't matter. With James Bond, I see the same thing where again, the reason I don't think James Bond can be played by a woman, and you and I agree, is that it it would fundamentally change many aspects of the character.
yeah,
Whereas with um, James Bond, I don't see. I mean, obviously, if it was being made in the '60s, absolutely, it would be a very big
yeah,
difference. It would change a lot of
yeah,
things about how he moves through the world.
hmm
Whereas now that we're in like the present year, current day, modern times. Um, like I'm trying to think. Like have you seen all the Craig films?
Not all of them. No.
Just if you've seen some of them, the way I see it is okay. Would this character being black or Asian or Hispanic change anything? So I look back at the Craig films, and I say, are there any scenes that would be fundamentally different
hmm
if he were black or
Yeah,
Asian or Hispanic? And the answer I come up with is no.
yeah,
So from like a fundamental standpoint, there's no reason he can't be black or
yeah,
Hispanic or whatever. However, now it gets to the point where that you brought up, which is, but even though the character is not defined by his race,
yeah,
is there a group of are there men who sort of look up to him as sort of like their it kind of sounds weird they say that, but like white masculine idol.
yeah,
Um, and are they going to be upset if he is played by? Will they take him being played by a black man or an Asian man or a Hispanic
yeah,
man as a almost like as a threat to them? I guess.
yeah. And I don't saying that again implies a kind of fragility to these people to be like, oh, you're so weak, you can't deal with the fact that, and no, that's not what I want to like suggest about people, but there is something where it's like, oh yeah, I really like this person. I looked up to them, and it's not that I would be destroyed if it was played by someone else, but um, it just wouldn't feel great to me to have them played by this someone. Now, the argument that I can already imagine people making against this is the fact that like there's so many white, you guys are the main, people across all, roles. So giving it to, a minority in this case, you saw so many like the majority of roles are still, white male leads, right? Um, but is James Bond so iconic? And not maybe let's say not just to white people in general, but to like British people, who, Ian Fleming, that those original stories at their core, that was a kind of almost mythology to England. It's one of the things that defines how they're known in popular culture, right? It's like, medieval fantasy, James Bond, these like stories that really represent their culture. Um, but in that case, my as an argument almost against myself, if it's representation of British culture and their what they're all about, um, would an Indian actor playing James Bond therefore be a very interesting choice given how tied those two countries are? And would it therefore also be kind of an extension of their culture rather than an overriding attack on it?
Hmm. Yeah, I think I like that the way you put it. I think you put it perfectly. It's, I said this once in a previous video, and I had to kind of be careful the way I spoke. The way I put it is, I feel like a lot of people who voice their sort of like umbrage with like this decision, I don't think they are bigots, but sometimes their arguments can, ki- like, I think that they're upset about something. I don't think they're bigots or racist or anything. I think sometimes though they are unable to articulate their arguments, so sometimes they kind of sound like it. So
Yeah,
like you said, like it's like, hey, well, if the character has to be white because it's a symbol of British culture, it's important pop culture aspect of Britain. But then of course the retort is, so you're saying that being white, being British is like inherent, being white is an inherent part of being British.
yeah,
And then you're like, well, no, and like, it kind of gets into like the weeds.
yeah,
But yeah, for example, like why not have an Indian actor? There are black people who are British, there are Asian
yeah,
people who are British. So it shouldn't really matter. That's
yeah,
not really what makes someone British, or like it's not
yeah,
a big thing of British culture.
yeah,
And when you kind of get into that area, it kind of gets a little bit testy. You have to
yeah.
really be careful there.
Are there so the question that, because so we both agree, like James Bond, there's nothing that like forces James Bond to be, the portrayal that he is. It's just kind of tradition, and the role could go to anyone. Also for story reasons too, because we've established that 007, right, is a code name. It's
Hmm.
there's people who can take on the identity because it's a spy name. It continues on. I think some of the movies established that James Bond is like it's a family. I think Skyfall did that, but there's nothing that says that they couldn't very realistically say that James Bond is just a cover identity that we assign to different people. An agent gets killed, we give it to another person. I think some people were even saying that like the fact that we see all the different, Pierce Brosnan, Sean Connery all play James Bond, they're all playing the same dude. It's just a cover identity that gets passed to each, different actor who's playing him.
Hmm.
They're just continuing on the role. So for story reasons, there's nothing that says that they couldn't, have James Bond played by someone else. Um, but are there icons who you know could not be portrayed by a minority? It would be disrespectful to do so in a way that's not the argument of course is that like we want to encourage diversity, we want to encourage bringing all these people into it, but are there roles that are like, no, this should stay the traditional white guy playing this because it's just too iconic, we don't want to see someone else in this role?
Yeah. Well, it's hard because the same, I often hear this from people who are sort of like who take up, like again, like you said, I don't think there are any inherent story issues with having James Bond being played by a black guy or any guy.
Yeah,
So it's more of this sort of, um I don't really know how to put it. It's more of a cultural,
yeah,
quote unquote tradition sort of thing. Um However, the issue with that is a lot of the people who I hear make that argument, like about like, oh, he's a white icon. He's,
yeah,
that's important to me.
yeah,
The issue with that is that often those same people are the ones who will often say, um, it like like the, hey, you just brought up about like promoting diversity. Well, why does it matter if a character is gay? Why does it matter
yeah,
if a character is black? And I think on some level they have a point,
yeah,
in the sense of, I think a lot of media sometimes will hey, look, this character, like, like the whole J.K. Rowling Dumbledore thing.
Yeah,
Hey, Dumbledore's gay. Isn't that awesome?
yeah,
And everyone's like, I mean, I guess, like, it's not really that big. It's kind of weird that you're sort of like
yeah,
hyping it up like that. Like we're trying to, the whole point is we're trying to make it, these things normalized in society. And you're kind of like holding it up like, look, isn't this amazing?
yeah,
Which is kind of weird. Um, However, but then the flip side to that argument, when you go out to them, is like, hey, I agree with you.
mhm,
Who cares if a character is black or gay or whatever? So why not just have all characters be black or gay or
yeah,
et cetera, et cetera? And it kind of gets into it. It's hard because I try to like understand that perspective of like, because like it's weird because like when I think of characters who I resonate with, and this has been a narrative that I've seen pushed, and I'm sure you've heard it. And I actually, like, if you want to, if I can get your take on it, how do you feel about people who sort of say that like, oh, like say like a black kid's like, oh, I'm not able to empathize with white characters. I've heard this narrative kind of be
yeah,
pushed a bit. I think it was it was Kumail Nanjiani at the Oscars where he said something along the lines of, I learned to empathize with white characters my whole life. Now you guys have to learn to empathize with non-white actors. And
yeah,
I always hated that narrative that like, oh, I can't empathize with characters that aren't my skin color. I understand in terms of like, there is something to be said about sort of like seeing yourself portrayed,
yeah.
sure, but I really hate that idea of like, if you're not the same skin color, you can't empathize with one another.
No, that's an idiotic. Like if you
Yeah.
can't empathize with someone because they're skin color, you're an idiot. And there's a lot of idiots out there. I get there's an element of truth to what he's saying, which is white people are like the default in media in Western culture. So regardless of if you're not white, like you're growing up, you're like, this is all the characters are white, so you do have to learn to um not that you wouldn't learn that regardless, but like there is an element to it. I've talked about this that I I almost see like, as a as a normal, if it's a normal role, race has nothing to do with it, right? I'm like, oh, okay, like Tony Soprano or whatever. This I empathize with you. I almost like stand in for you. It doesn't, because you're white or whatever. It's just like a blank canvas where I can feel that way regardless. Versus, yeah, even other minority roles, like because it's not the default, at least for Western media. I'm like, there's a little bit of taking me out of this because again, white people, that's the normal, that's the default. I have no trouble empathizing with that. All the stories I've consumed are usually, white people in the lead. um so I get what he's saying there. I kind of got off track of what I was going to say here. um but I might have skipped over something you asked, but I wanted to bring it back to, I think one of the also problems people have, and I think we discussed this on some of our other episodes here, is I don't think diversity in and of itself would make most reasonable people mad. But the other thing that comes along with quote unquote diversity is straw man characters, which is, it's not just that we're going to make James Bond black or, whatever. It's that we're also going to give him a villain who is, Dr. White Power. And he, is, it's not, now suddenly it's not just like anyone could be James Bond. It's that the story we're telling here is, it's a fight against, racism and how white people are all evil, and that's why we had to change James Bond. And I think that's the part that pisses off a lot of people. There's definitely a subset that's going to get pissed off, no matter what, if he's not white. But um it's not just like, yeah, we're all, every race is equal and we're all getting along, and anyone can be any actor. It's like, no, you should feel ashamed of yourself for being white. And you know this is a story we're going to tell here, basically taking this character here and making him, there's going to be a character like in the mi5 whatever it's called, who's like, James Bond can't be black, and then James Bond has to fight against that racist boss or whatever. It's this strawman argument that comes along with a lot of these like diverse movies that pisses a lot of people off, and again contributes to what you said before, which is they're expressing the people who are expressing displeasure at that are not often like using the right words. They're expressing anger, and so people are like, "Oh, you're just angry because you're a racist and you want James Bond to be white." It's like, no, I want a good story, and a good story doesn't involve strawman characters who are just there to push a political agenda. It's about real characters in real situations who are believable people.
Yeah, a good example of that, I think, of like that exact sort of thing they're talking about is if you've seen the more recent Charlie's Angels film
Mhm.
with Kristen Stewart,
Yeah,
Naomi Harris, that was a film where oh, it's just gonna be a Charlie's Angels movie, like just the girls kicking ass. But then when you watch it, there is a very very on the nose like sort of like girls kick men's ass thing.
yeah,
Like all the male characters are like very explicitly bad people.
yeah,
And so in that, it's not so much that I'm like it's more the fact that it kind of takes you out of the story. You kind of it's almost as if it's not that you have necessarily a problem with like a story being like that's another thing you hear from people. Oh, they made it political, and it's
yeah,
like that. The people who say that don't really, I don't think, really. Again, they're not articulating what they mean. What they mean by that is like there are plenty of movies that they probably love that are very political.
yeah,
The difference is that how is that political message portrayed?
yeah,
In the case of Charlie's Angels, it's done in a very simplistic, on the nose,
yeah,
almost condescending manner.
yeah.
Whereas a film like um I don't know.
Let's bring it back. Let's bring it
Or
back to
like
The Wire, because that's we kind of started off talking about The
oh
Wire
yeah.
because that's a fantastic show that deals with racial identity, it deals with politics, but is not a straw man. The characters who are racist are not these like caricatures of, this is the evil white man here who needs to be taken down. Even those characters have moments of like genuine humanity, and you empathize with them. And on the reverse side, we have black characters who are not good people, who are not these perfect people who, if it just wasn't for this racist society, they would all be you know perfectly getting along. No, there's absolutely predatory black characters on the street who, are monsters, and who like we're like these people need to be taken down. But it's also not just those people. There's characters who have hearts of gold. There's characters who are somewhere in the middle. We see a wide spectrum of them, and so they feel real. And it's not like this pandering message where it's like, if it wasn't for this thing right here, everything would be fine. Like, no, it shows all the different facets of the issue, and that's why it's so well regarded. It's not preachy at all, and that's what, if you want to be diverse, that's what you should strive for, is The Wire, not this like cheap message that you're trying to pander to get points at the Oscar,
Yeah.
to get
It
some reward.
like for it's weird because like it's such a I'm glad you brought up that example because like The Wire is basically in many ways systemic racism the show.
Yeah,
Like there's no way around it.
yeah,
However, the way it goes about portraying that message is such a and they do it in such a nuanced manner
yeah,
that it gets the message across without feeling preachy. However, if there was a scene where, Bodhi sits down and like gives like a 5 minute monologue about like, let me tell you, and like, and they spell it out to the audience, yeah, again, it's just so condescending. So it's less about like, oh, this story is political, I don't like it. It's more about like it's just more about bad writing, really. I
yeah.
think.
Bad writing is
To
always what it comes down to.
Yeah. And however the issue I've seen, and I think that they have a point with that. The issue what I see is, and I've seen this happen just recently with say the Batman, what people will do what will sometimes happen is people will have a knee jerk reaction to it.
Yeah,
So for example, like you said, with oh well if they make James Bond black, then they'll have like the racist white villain who will and it'll be a whole thing for
yeah,
systemic racism. And the issue I have with that is sort of is it kind of feels conspiratorial in the sense of they are correct that there are examples of media that do this poorly. However, my contention is that now it seems like there's a certain subgroup of people where every time they see any sort of diversity in media, they automatically assume it's going to be
Yeah.
like really badly woke.
Yeah.
And like even the Batman, I know he got dragged a lot, and there was some film reviewer on YouTube who was like, "Yeah, I didn't like how all the bad guys were white and all the good guys were black," and it was weird because like I didn't even like again like in something like Charlie's Angels, the message of like men are bad, women are good is very apparent. It's right in
Yeah.
your face. Whereas in the Batman, I I didn't even kind of mention it until he meant I didn't even think of it until he mentioned it. And of course, that's ignoring that the main hero is also white.
Yeah.
Um, and so like that's sort of like what I that sort of attitude that I don't like of people
Yeah.
who kind of they almost read too much into it,
Yeah. I
like a
mean,
little bit
I
weirdly.
understand why they do it because it is so it happens very frequently, and I'm not a conspiracy person. I don't think it's like there's like this conspiracy to end white people through media, and we're slowly push. I think it's literally as simple as these screenwriters are bad writers, and they know that if they put certain things in here, they're gonna get points at the Oscars. They're gonna get awards from whatever. And if they don't put stuff in there, there's a the opposite end, which is a very vocal group of people, woke people, who will trash the movie um, for not doing some of these things. Like, how dare you make this bad guy not a racist? How
Mhm.
dare you or let's say the character is racist, it needs to be for plot reasons. How dare you show anything positive about this character? You're supporting racism. You are a Nazi, basically, for making this character nuanced and balanced. So they're worried about that too. So I don't think it's a conspiracy of like people pushing this agenda. I think it's just bad writers reacting to the market, and the
Mhm.
market kind of demands certain things.
Well, what I think what is really depressing about that though is like how you said like them. I think it definitely is like the writer is sort of like reacting. However, what upsets me is that it feels like they're always reacting to the the loud extremes.
Yeah.
So like you have 10% of the population who's like anytime I see diversity or any sort of like social or political issues put in a film, it's bullshit and it's woke crap. You have 10% on the other end who is like, hey, we need all these movies to be very on the nose. Like, they have to tackle systemic racism and sexism, and they have to do it in a very clear, and like, someone will say, like, you know, women can do it. Like, like that Charlie's Angels movie. There was like
Yeah.
a small minority of people who were like, woo, girl power,
Yeah.
even though it was really, in my view, very condescending.
Yeah.
But then there's the 80% in the middle who's like, we don't give a shit, just give
Yeah.
us a good story. And the problem is that the writers or like the studios, I think that more often than not, they bend to the will of the 10% on either side.
Oh yeah.
And it's annoying because like you and I, who I think we're in the middle, where it's like we don't really care about all that stuff. We just want a well written story. It seems like the studios are always only talking about when they say like, oh, the audience, they're only talking about the 10% anti woke
Mm.
or the 10% like mega woke. And it's really annoying
Well,
because
because
like
that's the people
everything,
who are most vocal,
yeah.
and that's a problem that has always been in any kind of when you get any kind of review, right, of anything, right, the vast majority of people are not going to comment on it. Taking like as a content creator, right, if you look at the comments, the vast majority of your viewers are never going to comment on a video. They're not going to let you know your thoughts.
Hmm.
So reading the comments is also not a really good indicator of whether you're doing something right or wrong, because the people who love you are always going to love you, even if you put out shit. They're going to be like, "I love you, Mac. You're so awesome." Blah blah blah. The people who hate you are always going to hate you no matter what
Hmm.
you do. It's like, you fucked up, blah blah blah. I just want to talk shit. The vast majority of people who are like, yeah, I'll watch a Mac video and I enjoyed it, but I'm going to move on with my life. I'm not going to talk about it. So those vocal extremes are usually, what gets defined on any type of argument because they're the loudest, and normal people don't spend all day thinking about this either, right? Like woke people, super woke people are not normal. Super reactionary conservative people are not normal. It's the freaks who kind of think about this all day and fight about it all day. You go out into the street, normal people, you ask them about what they thought about the racial politics of the Batman, they're like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" You know, it's like they're not even thinking about this shit.
Yeah, did you see that the I think they said something like the commissioner and the mayor and the DA and the main villain were white, and it's like, and like Gordon and Catwoman were black. It's like, yeah, but wasn't like Batman also white? It's
Yeah,
like, yeah, but that
it
doesn't
didn't even come
like
into their head. Yeah,
it's a weird. It's kind of weird how like I get upset at like the super woke people for doing that. Like there was I think I saw one film where there was like, or no, it was a TV show where the villain was a black woman, and
yeah,
someone like in this like like this crazy person wrote an article. It's like, look at this, like the show is like a product of white supremacy because they're attacking a black woman, and us normal people are like, what are you talking about? Like no
yeah,
one even thought about this. And then, but however, then there's the extreme that is so reactionary to that, they end up sort of, it's almost sort of like horseshoe theory,
yeah,
where those same people become very similar to like the sort of like crazy woke people, where they're like, did you see how many like bad white people there were in that movie?
yeah,
And we're like, bro, you need to chill. Like,
yeah.
whoa. Like,
And that's good advice for everyone. You just need to chill and story. Like we talked about this before. This is the exhausting part of being a reviewer is we shouldn't have to argue about this. I mean, I'm not to say this whole podcast has been pointless, but like this really shouldn't be an issue. But the problem is people make it an issue to the point where we got to talk about it now. We should just be talking about storytelling structure, you know, the movie, whatever, blah blah blah. But now we're being dragged into this discussion of, you know, race, and we had to be like, no, you're being a baby. No, you're being a baby. Just shut the fuck up and enjoy the movie.
mhm.
We're like basically forced into the position of referee here, which is not fun at times, but I mean, at least it gives us something to talk about. But yeah, no, the culture war going on is exhausting, and I think I hope my hope for the future with all these media franchises is we can get to the point where it doesn't matter anymore, and we can just have fun, watch movies, enjoy them, talk about the things they do well and the things they do badly, and not have it be like a part of our identity. You shouldn't define yourself by any of this shit. Like it's just TV, it's just movies.
Mhm. Yeah, it like, so just to kind of like bring it back, it's like, I think the main difference is that you and I, when we look at this, like one the extremes of the situation are looking at, it's like, hey, what does having a black James Bond mean? What does it mean that they're trying to erase tradition and culture, or does it mean this is like a huge step for, black representation? And I think you and I kind of would agree that, like, I think both of those extremes are a bit too, there's too extreme. Like, I don't really think it's that big of a thing. Like, we're not talking about like the first like black president here,
Yeah,
or the first black, congressman, where it's like, James Bond. Like, it's not, is it kind of cool to see like, hey, a black kid sees like black James Bond? Yeah, sure, but they kind of like speak of it as if it's like going to be like the second coming of Christ or something,
yeah,
and it's going to have this major cultural impact, when in reality probably not.
yeah,
So, and I think you and I understand that. So when we're looking at it, we're like, when the question is asked, hey, could Bond be black? Our first instinct is to say, who gives a shit?
yeah,
Is he a good fit for the role? So like, for
yeah,
example, people have mentioned like John Boyega for James Bond, and I'm like, no, I don't think that he's a good fit for the role.
mm,
When I look at Idris Elba, I don't look at it like, oh, he's black, he should play
yeah,
James Bond. I look at it as if, oh, I think he has the vibe and attitude
yeah.
to play the character the best. So I don't care what color he is, just put him in the role because he'll give the best performance.
Yeah, no, I think, and again, that goes back to like the quality of the actor and their performance. Like Idris Elba has done so many things. You can look at his body of work and be like, you you're a fantastic actor. you get into the role. This isn't like just you as a person. There's actors who are like, it's just me. I'm just doing myself or whatever.
Hmm.
No, he's a character actor. He gets into what the role requires. He completely changes himself. And he can be fantastic in anything. Like, who knows if he's the one who's going to get it or whatever. But um, I think I agree with you. If we come full circle back to it, it's like, who gives a shit? I just want the movie to be good. If the movie's good and it's enjoyable and you didn't put a bunch of bullshit in there, then I don't give a fuck about who plays what.
Yeah, I think a good way to put it is like kind of like you were saying earlier about like people are kind of afraid like, well, if he's black, is the film going to be like super woke and like
Yeah,
super like on the nose? And the thing is like if it is, we'll criticize it for being so.
yeah,
However, I think it's a bit unfair to sort of assume that going into it, or to
yeah,
say that like, hey, he shouldn't be black because that might happen, and I don't like that. It's like if the movie comes out and it is, if it's like super cringy, woke, like it's about like it's a very like on the nose like racial messaging, yeah, sure, we can criticize that. We'll criticize the bad writing, but just preemptively sort of shooting it down because of that fear, I don't think is a good idea. And I think it actually like how can we ever get good diverse roles if we always assume the worst?
yeah,
The other thing is too, and you mentioned it first, and I really liked that. Like again, like this is the way I feel. I just want the best person in the role to do the role,
mhm,
and I think, and this kind of goes back to how some people, I don't think they mean to, but I think sometimes their arguments can sound bad. Is
mhm,
that whenever I hear someone say it's like, oh well, um, he doesn't have to be black. They should pick the best person for the role. The issue is that it kind of, like you said about like going back to like the default, it kind of implies that like, well, the only reason Idris Elba is being considered is because he's black, not
yeah,
because he's the best actor for the role.
yeah,
Again, I don't even think they like mean to imply that,
yeah,
but sometimes it can kind of come off like that.
yeah. And it could totally be like they might decide like, hey, we want a black James Bond, and it doesn't matter if we get the best white actor in the world, we're gonna put a black James Bond here. That's totally possible that a studio could do that. But assuming that they don't do that, that they actually consider the options and put the best person in there, um, then I don't have a problem with it. And I don't think any reasonable people should have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Although we know most people are not reasonable.
Yeah.
I think we're coming up on our hour here, so I hope this has been an interesting discussion for the people listening to this. I think we're gonna talk about certain things like this at times. I hope there's some people who get really mad whenever you talk about anything like political or cultural. They're like, just talk about The Sopranos, just talk about whatever.
As if The Sopranos is not a very politically charged
I
show.
know. And we will talk about that. We reviewed the Batman last one. We're gonna do more reviews. We're gonna do a bunch of stuff. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. We have some links in the description here for if you want to listen to it on. As of right now, it's available on Spotify and Google Podcasts, and hopefully it'll be available on more soon if Apple stops being a bitch and actually approves us. We'll
Oh,
see when that happens.
are they playing hardball?
It's I can't tell if it's like just the system like taking a while to do things or if there's like a manual approval process. Um, I don't know, but you can listen to it wherever you get your podcast. Hopefully, you can listen to it on our podcast dashboard, Simplecast. It's all linked in the description. Um, and let us know your thoughts in the comments and in the notes. And if you want us to, I feel like maybe we should have like a question segment here because we have an email listed here. Um, you guys can send it in to us if you want to tweet it at us or something. Go ahead and do that too.
Mhm.
But I think maybe moving forward, we should have we'll take a question from the audience. That'd be pretty fun.
Yeah, I put in the description the email. So I said like, hey, if you have any topics for request you want us to discuss, let us know.
Yeah,
But yeah, we can also do what we might be able to do. We can maybe speak to the fans, and
yeah,
once we pick a topic, we can announce it, and
yeah.
then we'll take a few questions before we
Hmm.
record it. We'll take a few questions from maybe like our community pages, and
Yeah.
then answer them at the end.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So, like we said in the last one, guys, we're gonna get better and better at this. We're still figuring things out. We're still getting used to it. But I hope this was entertaining. It was very entertaining for me to talk with you, Mac, for another hour each week, and I'm looking forward to our next one because we always come up with some spicy, interesting discussions.
Yeah, hopefully it was refreshing. I assume that most of the discourse around this is either like everyone who doesn't think James Bond is black is a racist, or anyone who thinks he should be black is like a cultural Marxist
Yeah,
cuck or something. So hopefully this was a bit of a more middle ground,
yeah.
nuanced take on the issue.
If you want our political opinion, our opinion is shut the fuck up and just enjoy the goddamn movie.
Or focus on the writing.
Yeah,
That's like sort of like how you and I see a lot of media. Focus on the writing and the storytelling, and if it's bad, criticize the bad writing.
hmm
But once we start getting into wokeness and political correctness, and it's just like cultural, it's like let's stick to the writing and storytelling.
exactly. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode of No One's a Critic coming next week, probably. We'll talk to you guys then.
Take care.